SoundCartel.
What's happening in UK podcasting? Well, this episode we're talking to Jake Warren, founder and CEO of Bristol-based podcast agency Message Heard, an agency that's breaking new ground with a familiar podcast philosophy.
What we have to make sure from the beginning is this is not vanity publishing for your CEO. And I think a lot of people come to it with that in mind. They go, right, my CEO, Bob, thinks he's the most interesting person in the world and he wants to talk to his mates. And quelle surprise, they're all 50-year-old white guys called Bob as well. You know, so it's fighting that, right?
I'm Nick Schildberger, Managing Director of audio agency SoundCartel. And this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 12 of season 5. And joining me is producer and co-host Nicole Goodman.
Hello, Nick. Terrific to be back again.
Great to have you here. Now, I'm excited about today because we've spent quite a lot of time exploring the US podcasting market, in addition, obviously, to the Australian landscape. But we haven't spent as much time in the UK, so it will be quite interesting to see where they're placed.
And, you know, the UK is also a hotbed of creativity, particularly Bristol, where Message Heard is located. There's a lot of creative energy and podcasting agencies that have sprung up. So it's not a country that we've explored a lot, but I'm excited too about talking to Jake, seeing what's going on there.
Yes, well, there are podcast agencies popping up all over the world now. But it seems that the UK landscape is not that dissimilar from ours here. But let's get to Jake so he can tell us.
So Jake Warren is an award-winning journalist and he's worked with the likes of Vice, BBC, Channel 4 and The Guardian. He then decided to take his journalistic credentials into the world of podcasting by going in hardcore and starting his own agency called Message Heard. And they tell fabulous stories through their own podcast, but also through working with brands. In fact, they have a swathe of fascinating podcasts under their belt. And Jake explains to us that Message Heard is actually on a really exciting trajectory.
Welcome, Jake, to Podcasting Essentials.
Hey, Jake. Great to have you with us.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me.
These days, it seems almost a rite of passage for journalists to move into the podcasting space. But what was it that drew you, not just to the medium, but to start your own agency?
It's a good question. I was working as a journalist, documentary maker for Vice and primarily video for a long time. And then in my sort of mid-20s, went through the same sort of crisis that I think that many young English or British journalists have, where they think, well, I want to be taken really seriously, so I have to go work at the BBC. So I ended up doing some work at the BBC and eventually made my way to BBC Radio. And this was sort of 2017, you know, so the kind of the marquee moments in podcasting that made it sort of explode had happened, right? You know, Serial had come out, Gimlet Startup had come out, you know, these huge things from North America that had just taken over the whole world that I had loved. And I remember I was like, well, this will be great because we can do some podcasts at the BBC perhaps. And that was a wrong line of thinking because trying to beat that drum was either met with, what's a podcast? Or what do you mean? If you miss Women's Hour, you can listen to it on catch up. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking about, but it kind of was the catalyst for me to do that brave/stupid thing of if you really believe that podcasting is the future of storytelling and maybe to go even more, make an even bolder statement, the future of communication, and the biggest state broadcaster that does everything isn't really doing it, well, there feels like an opportunity there. So, you know, if I really believe in it, I should do my own thing, regardless of whether you know what you're doing or not. And I think in the almost 4 years we've been going, hopefully I've been somewhat vindicated in that decision.
I think you have, yes.
Yeah, well, you have been vindicated because A Message Heard has become the first podcast agency to be signed by the talent agency Curtis Brown. How did that come about, Jake?
Yeah, we signed with them at the end of January this year, and it's been a whirlwind 6 months now. Geez. I suppose it came about for a number of different ways. One, because we obviously work with lots of different talent for lots of different shows, and therefore you have to sort of build relationships with the different talent agencies. Also because, this year in particular, it's really come to the fore, this idea of IP exploitation. How can you take successful podcasting and exploit that into other more traditional and, in many cases, more lucrative mediums, right? So this idea of, if it's a good podcast, will it be a good drama, or will it be a good film, or will it be a good book? So I think we always had one eye on that as well. But also, podcasting will probably replace, or not replace, but make better the developmental process for TV and film. Because if you're Netflix, for instance, rather than just giving Wondery loads and loads of money to turn Dr. Death into a TV show, why not actually fund the creation of podcasts yourself, which is obviously cheaper, and you're going to get real impactful data to understand that. And what we know from that data as well is that podcasts and TV shows are complementary, not competitive with one another. So the person that loves the podcast is probably going to be the first person that watches the Netflix TV show, right? So what I kind of wanted to do was to say, well, we should be getting in front of these people and having those conversations. And so I went looking for the right partner, and from conversations with Curtis Brown quite early on, it was immediately apparent that they had the same vision and understanding of how important audio was. And so it kind of just made sense, right? It took a while to iron it out and figure out exactly how we were going to do it. But working with them is great because, not only does it give us sort of first dibs on their talent, it also means I've got a bad cop for commercial negotiations at the table, which is fantastic. And we get to work closely with them with their deep-rooted connections with the right people at Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever it is, or the leading production company. So it just, as a one-stop shop, it makes life a lot easier.
So what projects are you working with Curtis Brown on at the moment?
We have a few different things in the works. We've got some of our shows which have done pretty well, which are looking to be adapted at the moment, and we're kind of at that sort of serious exploration stage, right? People are putting together some proposals and things like that. And this is a world that's new to me as well, right? I'd be lying if I said I was well-versed in taking things and making films. But so we've got some of our own shows, Finding Natasha, which is one of them, which, fingers crossed, touch wood, is looking like there's a lot of interest to potentially turn that into a film. We've got some of our other shows as well, like Conflicted, although that is not a show that would work in its current format in TV or film or anything really like that. It's underpinned by the life stories of Eamon and Thomas, which are quite amazing. Ex-Al-Qaeda guy turned MI6 double agent. And his sort of life rights and his life story is something that you could easily take and adapt, as well as sort of working on newer projects, right, with some of the more marquee names that are signed with Curtis Brown. And I won't say their names because it's not at that stage yet, but finding co-productions with people that want to both fund the podcast and maybe fund the TV or video element to it. So we're really at that stage about throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. And there's a world of opportunity out there. I mean, a lot of people that I've spoken to, they keep saying to me, and it sounds like a trope, right? Oh, it's the age of IP, which kind of means nothing. But at the same time, it seems to mean that people want to look at podcasting far more seriously. And for me, that's a great thing.
Yeah, we'll keep throwing. I hope a lot of it sticks in the near future for you, Jake.
Thank you.
You mentioned there's been an explosion in podcasting, since the likes of Serial and Gimlet startup. Can you briefly describe, though, the podcast landscape in the UK for our audience here?
Yeah, I mean, podcasting in the UK, the adage that I use, and it is an embarrassing trope, is the kind of, America sneezes and we catch a cold, right? And it's true because they're always a few years ahead of us in everything I do, and probably the same for you guys as well in Australia. And there's a lot more people in America, right? But in the UK at the moment, there's 15 million podcast listeners in the UK, right? Now, that's not bad. Now, if you look at it proportionally, 40% of all 25 to 35-year-olds listen to podcasts. That's a pretty meaningful number. So I think, although podcasting is nascent in terms of it being a professional industry in the UK, and we've got some way to go to be able to actually challenge some of the huge breakout shows from America, and it's hard to have a huge hit the other way, it shows that it's growing. There's going to be 20 million listeners over the next few years, right? That's a meaningful number of what is a relatively small island that is riddled with plague at the moment. So it's pretty good, right? And the other thing I think as well, that if you can take any plus point from a pandemic, and I'm loath to, but it's proven to be a robust medium as well, because there was perhaps an assumption before that, well, podcasts are just something that you listen to on your way to and from work. And I think that was probably true for a lot of people, including myself. But what it's proven is that it's a robust medium, because although the working world has changed, and I don't know about you, but I'm not sitting on the underground for 50 minutes anymore on my way to work. I still listen to podcasts, and that is the same for everyone else. In fact, it's still growing. So the consumption rate is really high in the UK. People, they find their shows, they're loyal to those shows. So all in all, it's an exciting time for audio.
We've referred to it as being pandemic proof.
Yeah.
So how about brands in the UK thinking about podcasting? Do you find it an easy sell, or are there core reservations that some are having?
I think we've probably got to the stage where everyone knows they need a podcast, but they have no idea how to do it or what's the best method or really the first thing about podcasting, right? And that's an exciting thing because it means you've got people who are eager and open, and they're already bought into the fact that podcasting is something that they should be doing. And, this whole idea of every company has to be a media company. Well, now you need to have a distinct audio strategy within that, right? I kind of think that people believe that now. But what is perhaps less exciting is the fact that people really are clueless. We're still very much at the point where you're having to educate the market in terms of what does good sound like. And I think the biggest way that I would describe it is when talking to a CMO or a marketing manager or even a CEO of a company that thinks, well, I want a podcast because I want to have my own thought leadership channel, or I want to attract a big editorial audience, or we have really interesting things to say, is making them understand that podcasting is not a functional activity. It's not just, I have a microphone, I have a laptop, therefore I have a podcast. Well, yeah, okay, maybe you have a podcast, but it's probably going to be rubbish. Actually, podcasting is a craft, much in the same way that, if I said to that person, well, here's a camera, make me a film, are you going to win an Oscar? You're probably not going to be able to do it. Maybe one or two of them might, but the line chances are you're not going to be able to. And I think it's about making people understand that it's not just a technological, functional thing. There's craft that goes into doing something successful. And that, I think, can be a challenge, but it's also an exciting challenge because it means that you really get to find the best stories and the best formats and the best tone and the best style, and to do stuff that isn't just one long advert. And I think we sort of relish doing that, in all honesty.
Absolutely. And following on from that, what are some of the best results that you've seen from brands producing original podcasts?
Well, that's a good question. And I won't just list ones that we've made because that would be very conceited and probably wrong as well. But, we're certainly proud of some of the ones that we've done. And in fact, actually, some of our work with Buffer got honoured at the Webbies recently for innovation, which was really...
Don't be shy.
Well, it's the British in me, isn't it? I really like the Dell podcast, Trailblazers, with Walter Isaacson. I don't know if you've listened to that. It's all about sort of digital disruption, innovation, human progress. It's like listening to a documentary or something that feels very editorial. But the reason why I like that, beyond it just being a good show, is that if you said to me, what do you think about Dell? I would have said the honest answer to you, which is, well, didn't they just make computers 15 years ago before Apple made computers, right? I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about them. But the fact that they've done this show that feels high quality, it's very editorial of its very nature, it makes me obviously have a more positive perception of that brand, which I kind of thought had just gone away. There is a podcast which won an award at the British Podcast Awards in 2021, which is from Weber, the barbecue brand, and it's called Grilling. And it's all about, how to be a good barbecuer. And I mean, this is probably sacrilege to you guys in Australia because we get to be able to use the barbecue about 2 days a year. But as much as I like it, I'm the prime candidate to burn everything. So this kind of tips and tricks, and I really like that because that's much more, although it's not an advert, it's very closely obviously aligned to what they are as a brand, and it's kind of thought leadership in the truest sense of it. Here's how not to mess up when you're actually using one of our lovely barbecues. It does work, and there's little sort of almost sizzling sound bites. I like that one. And then I think it was 2019 now, Land Rover did some fictional podcasts which were almost sort of like more audio dramas, but they did it on location. It'd be driving 4x4s throughout mountains and hills and ravines and stuff, and everything was being recorded on location. And yes, of course, there's some audio drama element to it, which, to be frank, was not the reason that I'm interested in it, but more this idea that, look, we can do this everywhere to high quality, and also obviously it's the Land Rovers that are driving them around. So it kind of, although that's a bit of a strange example, I liked it because it just felt quite innovative.
Well, Jake, you actually do have a great catalogue, quite varied actually, and there's a distinct journalistic approach to most of the podcasts that you have produced. It's really interesting and gives a deep dive into the subject matter. Is this the core of your approach, both to your independent and branded podcasts?
Yes, I think we certainly strive for that. When we first started, I was paranoid about being pigeonholed in terms of, oh, you just do stupid slapstick podcast, or you just do super serious po-faced journalism, right? When we started, we wanted real breadth to the formats and the style and the genres of everything that we made. And I think we established that. And what I think is at the heart of what we want to do, and I think what we've had our most success in doing, especially on the editorial side, is to do that more narrative storytelling, more journalistic focus. That's where a lot of the background of a lot of the people that work in the team is from, myself included. I also think that that's more impactful when it's done well. And of course, crucially, it's much harder to do, right? Two people tete-a-tete with a microphone, celebrity A talking to celebrity B is not particularly engaging, in my opinion. And actually to be able to do a documentary series that's grounded in original and proper journalism and proper storytelling, that to me is the really exciting part of podcasting. And I suppose if that's the sort of gold standard of what we want to be doing, of course we do other things as well, proper more podcasty format stuff, but we want at least the high quality elements of what appeals to us to sort of be a through line in everything we do. If it is a celebrity talking to another celebrity, well, they have to be discerning celebrity with something to say, not just sharing the same anecdote they shared on Celebrity C's podcast last week, right? I'm not interested in diversifying reality TV stars' revenue streams, right? That doesn't particularly appeal to me. And the same can be said for the branded side of the business, right? If you have, and I think we do, a really good way and process of creating high quality storytelling, well, branded podcasts are exactly the same. You should not be approaching anything any differently than if it was an editorial thing under your own banner. I think as soon as you start going, well, we do the high quality stuff ourselves and we shovel shit for our clients, well, there's a hell of a good way to lose a client, but also it means you're not going to stand out. And I think, of course, you're not going to be able to perhaps do it in exactly the same way. But if you're taking those core elements and principles throughout every tenet of your business, it's going to result in a better end product. And that's what we try and do. Editorial and branded are not siloed parts of our business. They're symbiotic. And we come to every project with the exact same approach.
With so many brands diving into podcasting, how do you make sure that their podcast is going to stand out?
Yeah, it's a hard one because every brand is different and their goals are different. I think what we have to make sure from the beginning is this is not vanity publishing for your CEO. And I think a lot of people come to it with that in mind. They go, right, my CEO, Bob, thinks he's the most interesting person in the world and he wants to talk to his mates. And quelle surprise, they're all 50-year-old white guys called Bob as well. So it's fighting that, right? And one of the things that we do very early on is we do something called a discovery workshop before we actually engage working with clients. And this is for free of charge, right? And basically, it's a consultancy session. It's like, okay, well, what are your ideas? What do you want to achieve? What's your end goal for what your audience looks like? What do you want them to come away thinking, feeling, doing? And we work back and we go, okay, well, let's find the best format, the best stories, the best concept, the tone, the style that's going to work, not just in achieving your mission statement, but also that works crucially in audio, right? So we're not just shoving a square peg in a round hole, because it has to be as high quality as it can be. Because I think a lot of people just will take the money and think, well, we can make it good in the edit. Well, that's a hard thing to do if you've got a mediocre recording to make a high quality edit. And I think it ensures a much better product, both for us, because obviously we don't want to be doing mediocre stuff, but also for the brand, because it's doing something that's going to meet their goals, but also work in audio.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more, Jake. It's exactly our philosophy as well. You mentioned before interview podcasts, they've got to really stand out. Again, when working with brands, to get that cut through, do you think they more often than not now need to move towards a higher level of production, whether it be narrative or more voices or even something like immersive audio?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a case-by-case basis, right, in terms of what the brand is trying to achieve. If it's a B2B business brand or if it's a B2C, consumer brand, every business is different and it's going to have a different formula that works for it. I think if you want to stand out, because for all the reasons that we said before, everyone kind of knows you need a podcast now, which means your competitors probably are going to have a podcast as well. Well, what can you be doing that's going to just really blow them away and make yours the one? And I think for a lot of brands, narrative storytelling is a really good thing to be doing. The example that I would use for some of our work is we work with Buffer very closely, where we've done sort of narrative documentary storytelling, which has been really, really successful. And I think that was a really good way of how they stood out, because what you want as the brand, I believe, is if you think of it as an advert for yourself, no one likes listening to adverts. And you know what? I don't like listening to an advert that's 19 seconds long, let alone something that's 28 minutes long. So it's going to put people off, and you're not going to be able to grow an audience. And I think that for brands, if you can be the convener to the interesting stories of your industry, by being the people that are telling those stories, you're going to get a degree of ownership over them. So if you can just position yourself as the facilitator and the storyteller for everything that's really interesting that's going on in your world, you're going to appeal to a much larger audience. It's going to feel much editorial. It's going to feel much richer. And you're going to get the perception of ownership over that. And that's the kind of thinking that I think needs to be done more of, because to be frank, just having an interview podcast is not going to cut it nowadays. It has to be bigger, better, bolder, more high quality.
Well, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and talk about marketing, because all podcast producers are looking to grow their audience. And we've discussed that brands have some advantages in this space. But what marketing tactics have you used with greatest effect in the UK?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that there's not a crystal clear, here are the two things that I do, which means that you're going to be on the front page of Apple, right? It doesn't quite work like that, sadly. One of the things as a point of principle that, again, goes throughout every aspect of our business, whether it's editorial, branded, or whatever, is that you have to think about and build marketing into when you're actually thinking about the production stage. Those are not two different things. You don't go, right, I finished my podcast, now I need to think about marketing my podcast. That doesn't work. You know, it's the equivalent of dropping a film on YouTube and expecting you to have 100 million views, right? It doesn't quite work like that. So I think it comes down to kind of, again, what's the concept of the show? Are you getting guests with the right profile, the right inbuilt audience, which can help leverage that? I think PR from a branded perspective is a really interesting way of doing it, both in terms of trade press for those particular industries, but also if it's high quality, just more sort of general press that's out there. You know, cross-pollination, I quite like that as well. You know, can you find other interesting, relatable shows in which you can, you know, promote each other or even interview each other? There's lots and lots of different ways of doing it. Perhaps it's about growing a sense of community. We have a Facebook group for one of our shows, which, you know, we did, as to be frank, as almost a kind of, well, we should do it because we should do it sort of thing. And it's almost become a place for the most zealous fans to interact with each other. And it really does add value to it because it proves that sense of community. You know, podcasting in general, two of the biggest issues with it still are obviously discoverability and that social aspect. And I think anything that you can do to help enhance that, that is the core definition of kind of marketing a podcast, right? Is how can I get people that like it or would like it to find it and interact with it? And so we're always doing clever things. Of course, if you have the money, smart advertising campaigns and all of that kind of stuff, of course that works to a certain degree, but not everyone has the budget to be able to do that. And I think that organic marketing is really just being able to identify all of the different which ways you can take your product and put it in front of the natural audience of that, rather than them expecting to come to you and find it. You know, the kind of field of dreams, build it and they will come model is a load of bollocks in reality. So I think it's what are the clever, innovative ways that you can take it and put it in front of people. And that probably means a slightly different tailored approach for every single show, because every single different show should be slightly different.
Yeah, it's a slow burn, but if you put in the hard work, you'll get the results.
Absolutely. It's a momentum building exercise.
Jake, I also wanted to ask you, your podcast, and you mentioned it fleetingly early on, Finding Natasha. It's a podcast based on your mother when she was a young girl being selected to go perform ballet in Russia, and a quite extraordinary escape from Russia and finding the woman Natasha who helped her do that. What was that like, producing that podcast as her son?
Well, I should probably caveat it by saying that I wasn't immediately looking to exploit my mum's trauma for content. And luckily she likes the podcast very much, and indeed Natasha does as well. So I always feel like I have to start with that to make myself not look like a monster. basically, that's been a whirlwind because it was never supposed to be a podcast. It was a story that I only really became aware of 18 months, 2 years ago, something like that, in its entirety, and kind of made a mental note, well, I need to do something about this when I have the time to do it, and kind of just for my mum's sake, really. And then when we were in a similar scenario to you are in now, lockdown 1, I went back to stay with my mum for a couple of months. And I kind of thought, well, not entirely sure what's happening with work and stuff like that at the moment. This feels like a good time to maybe try and find Natasha. And I was telling my colleagues about it, as you do. And they said, well, look, we should start recording some of this. You never know, it might be something. I thought, okay, well, maybe it'll be a nice little marketing activity for Message Heard. And to be frank, it just kind of snowballed and turned into what the show is now, which has been so well received. It's all a bit crazy to me. I mean, and I'm too close to it, right, to be able to talk about it objectively. But to reunite my mum with a woman that saved her life 50 years ago in the Soviet Union, and for them to now have a relationship and it now being talked about, being turned into a film, and mum almost talking to people about book deal. It all feels a bit very surreal, to be honest. But I've won the #1 son award. That's that's the most important thing for me.
Well, job well done there.
Did your mum want to play herself in the movie?
Well, so, I mean, my mum has gone from saying to me, darling, I'm a very private person. And I go, okay. To then ringing me up, a couple of weeks ago, and, well, I don't understand. Jack Whitehall and his dad have a TV show. So, well, I thought you were a very private person. But yeah, I mean, even those conversations where you're talking to, world-leading production companies, and they go, so have you had any thoughts about who would want to play you or your mum? It's like, what the hell? I mean, it feels otherworldly to me. But yeah, look, it's really, really exciting. And it goes to show, if you just do something that's authentic, even if you think it's going to be small, it can really punch above its weight and get a mass audience, which is great.
Yeah. Now, final question, Jake. For brands listening that are thinking about starting a podcast for the first time, what's your advice on what they should be considering to get the best bang for their buck in 2022 and beyond?
Branded podcasting, it's like a suit or loo roll. What you pay for is what you get. I do believe that to a certain degree. And I think to think about it would probably be, what are we doing that's different? What are we doing that's innovative? What are we doing that our competitors aren't doing? And what are we doing that is going to enhance our brand or move us towards our goals? Because the downside of branded podcasting, and I say this to all of our clients and our prospective clients, is if you do it badly, it's brand damaging, because you've done it really, really poorly, and that's going to reflect upon your brand. And it's very, very easy to do it badly. So I think without having a necessary, here's the 5 things you need to be doing, I would just be thinking, almost go back to one of the questions you asked me, right, is what are the best branded podcasts out there? And what are the elements that they're doing that we could extrapolate and fit to ourselves, that would work for us? So whether that's narrative storytelling, whether it's just discerning sort of interview podcasting, whether it's doing something that's slightly more innovative in terms of sound design or whatever it is, be thinking about how can we do something that is a craft and not just a functional activity of owning a microphone and a laptop. And I think for brands to think about that is really important going into this next year in particular, because everyone recognizes that to have a podcast is almost a default expectation now.
Very true.
Well said, Jake. All the very best with Message Heard, and thank you so much for joining us on Podcasting Essentials.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jake. It's been brilliant having you.
Thanks, guys. Speak to you soon.
Jake is such a passionate operator, isn't he, Nick? He's just got his eye on the prize, and it's comforting to hear agencies saying similar things about the state of podcasting and the opportunities that exist from an audience and a brand perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. My neck got sore in that interview from nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
The UK podcasting landscape is definitely vibrant, there's no doubt about that, like it is here, and brands are all trying to work out how best to utilise the space. I've actually noticed here that we don't need to educate brands so much about the benefits of podcasting. For us, it's more about how they can best utilise the audio in their own unique way.
Yeah, there's definitely been an evolution that we've noticed. And it's exactly like Jake said. We also spend a lot of time upfront facilitating strategy workshops with our clients. It's so true that if you put in the time at the beginning to work out the purpose, the why, and the best approach to tell that brand story, it just makes the production flow so much better.
Yeah, I'm always amazed how much comes out of those sessions. And they're fun as well. It's really interesting to dig deep into why a brand wants to produce audio and then from that come up with the show that's going to do the best for them and their audience.
That's right. And often a brand will come in thinking that they have an idea of what they want, but after these strategy sessions, it becomes clear what they actually need. And so it's eye-opening for both parties.
Indeed, but that is all we have time for on this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thanks, Nicole, for joining me.
It's been stellar. Thank you, Nick. For
more about us and how we can help you produce a podcast, you can visit soundcartel.com.au or our socials @SoundCartelAU. From the team at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.